Welcome to the Bernie's Bootlegs podcast, where we explore the stories of successful musicians and share their perspectives on being an artist in a digital age. I'm your host, Kenny McCabe, and let's get into the show. Today I'm speaking with saxophonist and composer David Binney. Originally from Los Angeles, David lived in New York City for nearly 40 years until recently returning to the LA area. He has over 20 albums out as a leader and has worked with an unbelievable cast of musicians in a wide array of circumstances. We discuss how he balanced having a day job with being a musician when he first moved to New York, how the advent of the internet has changed the music scene and recording industry, the things he thinks are key to making a living in music today, his compositional process, and much more. You can find David on his website at davidbinney.com. And so without further ado, I bring you my conversation with David Binney. Okay, guys, I'm here with David Binney. David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure, man. We've been dealing with some technical difficulties like phones and all this sort of stuff, but all of the technology willing, I think we're good to go. So how are you, man? I know you just came back from the park. LA is obviously a very beautiful place to live, and you mentioned that you just actually relocated there, although you are from the area about 2.5 years ago. So tell us a little bit about that.
As I was saying before, I started this interview in the park. Now we ran out of power there, but I grew up in Ventura, just north of here, and I started playing music there when I was probably 13 years old, and studied in LA, starting when I was about 15, and traveled down here. It was like an hour each way, and just studied here, and eventually realized, right when I graduated high school, that I didn't want to move to LA because I didn't really like the scene here. So I moved to New York, and I was there for 36 years, almost 37 years, which was great, and now I'm back. So it's been great. It's just as I was saying before, the scene here is really great now, and it just kind of grew up, and there's a lot of great young players that used to leave LA, like myself and so many of my friends that are in New York. But the young people are staying. Most of them are staying now, and a lot are coming, and a lot of the established players are coming. Justin Brown's here. I always play with Justin, Gerald Clayton, Tim LaFave, Mark Giuliana, Gretchen Parlato. There's so many people. John Escreed is coming soon. There's a lot, and other people that are seriously thinking about it. So it's been great. I think it's really energized the scene, and I've have these bands of with a lot of young players that are super amazing. And as I said before, I'm playing tonight with my band. It's a great pianist, Luca Mendoza, who's Vince Mendoza's son. He's 21 years old. The other two guys are 21, Logan Kane and Benjamin Ring. And then also Domi and JD Beck are going to play tonight. They're what Domi's 19, I guess now, and JD is 15, I think, or 16. It's kind of crazy. So it's kind of a crazy scene, and it's great. It's very creative, and the lifestyle here. It's 80 degrees today and nice. On Halloween, so and the food. It's also much cheaper here. I mean, I loved New York, and I always will. It's just it changed. It got to be such a moneyed place and very difficult for artists, and it just when I got married, we needed more space, and this was definitely the answer, So it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear that a lot is happening over there. I've never been to Los Angeles, but I'd love to check it out sometime, especially with your description of the way that the scene is kind of growing and expanding. So it's awesome. So you moved to New York in like 1980, 81. or something like that, I
Right.
believe. And something that a lot of people might not know is that you actually worked day gigs for like the first 10 years or so, like living in New York. And I wanted to ask
Mhm.
you because obviously making a living as a professional artist is very difficult, and a lot of people that are listening to this are going to end up having to do a day gig or something along those lines. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe just the type of jobs that you were doing, and how you thought about balancing a day gig with trying to improve your musicianship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good question. It wasn't really back then. I mean, the music school thing wasn't big. I mean, Cal Arts had just started there. There was a few other music programs, jazz programs around the country, but it wasn't a big deal. Most people didn't go to school at that time for jazz. I had contemplated it, but then thought, well, let me go to New York for a year and just check it out. And I could always, go to school if I don't like it or it's not comfortable for some reason. I immediately loved New York, and it was a rough place back then. It was a completely different city, but I loved it. And so, but the reality was, and this was normal for people, was just, you had to get a day job. I mean, it wasn't. It's funny when I teach so much now, and I have students, and it's funny because a lot of them have never had day jobs. A lot of the people that I play with now, they went to jazz school, they got out, they're playing. Um, or I don't even know how some people get along without it, but it was a normal thing now. So the first job I had was in a supermarket in the Bronx. I lived in the Bronx for the first 5 years, and then in the vegetable department. Then I got a job at Macy's department store in New Rochelle, which is just above the Bronx. And then after that, I was on a subway. I was on the train going to Manhattan, and I overheard a couple of guys talking about needing a receptionist for their law office that they had just started. And I just overheard them, and I said, I'm looking for a job. And so they hired me. They had 3 lawyers, and they hired me. That was probably 82, maybe. And I worked there until almost 1992, I think. I worked there for almost 10 years. And it grew too. When I left, there was probably 25 lawyers there. And I worked full time for a couple of years, traveling more than an hour each way to get to the job, which was on 13th and University. But then I worked part time, and I got an apartment in 72 in Riverside, which I had until this January 1st. Which is really cheap, $440 a month, and it was still $440 a month when I left this year,
Wow.
believe it or not, on 72 in Riverside.
Wow.
But it's a long story, but it's kind of a famous apartment in the New York scene. A lot of people were there and know it. I was there, like I said, 32 years. No utilities, nothing. So that having a low overhead, the key to being an artist, I think, is to have low overhead and have as much time as possible. I mean, I have a record 2 records ago called The Time Verses, and it's kind of based around the subject of time and how it's the commodity that really we should value more than anything. Because if you think about it, everyone who's working really hard to make money, I mean, it's just to spend on their free time, basically, or to have the time to travel, to do things. So, for me, it was about just low overhead, having the time to practice mainly, and to compose when I started composing, and then also just to go to the park. I mean, I lived on the end of Riverside Park. 72nd is where the park used to end until 2000 when they continued it. So there was nobody over there. I would just go out front and sit and I'd read books. And so it was great. I'd go to Central Park and sit around, read books, go back and practice. After this is working 3 or 4 hours a day at the job and then coming home. It allowed me to do all these things, and I wasn't stressed for money too much. I was stressed a little bit, even with a low, because I wasn't working that much, but still, that's kind of the key. And and then, that coupled with just working really hard, which I definitely have and still do, um, made it possible for me to do the things I've done. But I think that the advice I would give to young people is that, I mean, that's why New York is, I mean, I love New York, and it's still, there's a lot of great players there. I think the scene is fractured in a way that I really don't like. It's too compartmentalized and too, like, once I got out here, I was just like, wow, this is, like as I was saying before when we started the interview in the park, I'm playing with Chrissy Hind at the Hollywood Bowl with the LA Philharmonic, and I did a recording session the other day for Beck's Father, a rock record, and then I'm doing all this electronic stuff and solo concerts, and so I'm doing my composition thing. I'm finishing this classical record that's completely strings and piano, and there's no improvisation. So I'm doing all this different stuff, and it was stuff that I didn't get asked to do in New York, and the scenes just don't mix there. So when I'm at my gig at the Whale, which I'm doing, Blue Whale, which I'm doing tonight, actually, sometimes it'll be Thundercats there, Flying Lotus. There's all these people in the scene that are just kind of floating in different things. Rock people, I play with people from the rock world that know nothing about jazz but are good improvisers, like Nick Reinhardt. It's amazing. So it's just a really fertile scene, and so I think that, and it's cheaper here. So I advise the students that I have here, or the people I'm playing with, basically to stay here. The scene is really vital right now, and it's much cheaper than New York. So but if you can do it in New York, fine too, or anywhere. As I've said in other articles and stuff, I think you can practice and become good and create things from wherever you are. It's just basically time is the biggest thing that you want. And I know so many rich people. I used to have friends in New York that were stockbrokers and, people who worked so hard and made so much money, but always would always say to me, I wish I was doing what you're doing. And, for a long time, it took me a while to realize it. But then, after years of traveling and, I'm always in Italy or somewhere eating like the best food and vacationing somewhere over, just because of these connections I made through music or just being, I've seen the world, and I realized it's such a great life. And it's because I've had time to do it and time to work on my own stuff. And people who get into a lot of business stuff sometimes, they dream of doing some of the things I do regularly, like, that we do in this business. And they can pay for it. They just don't have the time to do it. So that's the same thing with art. I think you really have to have time to do it, and here I have time and the space to do it. That's another thing. Like I'm sitting right now in my studio. If I showed you, I have a drum set and keyboard set up and guitars and, everything. And, we do sessions here all the time. So I'm always playing, creating new music, trying out new music. That's really valuable too. So, and I would say to students also, just don't be afraid to do day jobs, because it was great, actually, in a lot of ways. First of all, it introduced me to the working world in a way that I realized this is not what I want to do with my life, is work in an office with fluorescent lights and whatever. And then also, it just makes you appreciate, what you're actually doing that much more. I never forget, like, how it was to work and go to work every day and do all those things. And I feel lucky to be doing what I'm doing, which I don't, sometimes with students now, I don't feel like they realize what a privilege it is to be an artist, if you can be. So, yeah, I'm sorry for the long answer, but
it's all good. Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's kind of the water that you swim in, art and music and all that sort of stuff, it can be very easy to take it for granted, and but if you look at it from an outsider's perspective, like a doctor or a lawyer or someone who, like you said earlier, may have aspired to do music when they were young, but ended up, going into the field that they're in now, that maybe is not fulfilling them the way that music would have if they had pursued that path. So definitely an important thing to keep in mind, and just try and be self-aware and a more objective perspective. Because if you think about it in the general context of things, getting to play music as a career, that's kind of awesome. That's pretty
Exactly.
unusual.
Exactly. It's definitely true. There's so many times I've been sitting around a table somewhere in Europe or Asia or whatever, and people are, we're just, man, we're lucky to be doing this, playing our music, and so we realize that, and it's the working thing is changing now too. I mean, the tours thing is not as much as happening as much and stuff. So there's other avenues to take, but just to be able to keep going and getting by. I'm not getting rich by any means, but I get by fine, and I do what I want to do. Can't ask for much more than that.
No doubt. And so, besides the whole touring thing, which has obviously changed, what are some other aspects of how to make a living as an artist that you feel have changed since when you first started making your living primarily as an artist, like in the early to mid 90s to now?
Well, obviously the internet, which wasn't around, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in the internet. I know people complain about the streaming stuff and all, and the payments and stuff, which it's true. It's horrible. Hopefully that will correct itself, because a lot of people are making money in the music business. It's just not being distributed fairly, I think.
Yeah.
But I also have a lot of friends, like, my friend Lewis Cole, someone who lives really close to here, actually. They've made careers out of just through the internet, basically, just posting stuff. And Lewis and Genevieve were struggling for a long time. I've known them for a long time, and they were struggling, but persistent and just doing their work. Really, I've never seen, especially Lewis, as somebody who's so obsessed with music and working, and then being dedicated to it and putting it out there, and basically putting it out for free, which would be seem like it would go against everything, but eventually people picked up on it, and you can monetize it. So they're touring all the time now. He gets things in movies and video games and all kinds of stuff. So it can pay off. All this stuff, whatever's happening, people complaining about the music business. I know a lot of people making livings, especially out here. Everyone, even the young people, there's nobody that comes up to me and complains about not working. Which New York, there were a lot of us where it's like not enough work, and especially the young people. But here, it's like everyone's busy. So there's a lot of work. People are still doing gigs and tours, and here people kind of go into, I know a lot of people who play jazz in the jazz world, and then also play in like the pop world, so there's a lot of gigs available for that. So they'll go on tour and then come back and play the jazz, make their records, whatever. And then I'm trying to think what other ways. There's a lot of, there's all this stuff there's so much video, right? So a lot of people out here, also people from New York that moved out, that don't even really play around much anymore, who are writing for films, writing for TV. A lot of people getting stuff placed. I know some people who just every day make, and this is worldwide. I know people in Europe too that are just make little tracks and to upload them to those placement sites, and are making good livings doing that. So I think it's as good as ever now. I think it's just switched. It's changed over a little bit. You don't really make money from a record, although I never made money from albums. I made more money on my last album, Here and Now, which I did no publicity for and didn't even release other than streaming, because I had no overhead for it and nobody to pay. Even if it didn't sell as many copies because of lack of publicity, although it seems like a lot of people have it, but I still made more money than I did on previous records that had wide distribution and everything. Now this new record is distributed on LP, so more people will hear it. But I find that you can have if you get a kind of a niche audience, you get your audience, and they support you and follow you. You can have a career with totally under the radar. How many bands and people do you hear about now that you're like, well, I've never heard of this, and then you see like have so many views or Instagram followers or whatever. Who are these people? There are so many people, and music is such a big thing now, as is video. There are so many pockets of things and things you can tap into and have a career that nobody will even notice if they're not looking for it. But you can be doing fine. And so really, I think if I really want, and I do kind of just do this, but if I just want to get up every morning and create, music in my room, once in a while maybe record in the studio, and just keep putting it out there, I could get by just being an artist, like truly an artist, like just creating things every day. I think that's possible. That's definitely possible now. It's just about getting to that audience and create and having them, and they'll follow you. If people like what you're doing, they'll support you. And that's without crowdfunding. I haven't done anything crowdfunding or whatever. That's another thing. I have a lot of friends doing that, like my friend Dan Weiss, who just got into it and is doing very, very well with it, I think. There's so many, that's a whole other thing. Crowdfunding, teaching, videos, like Dan is doing all these videos, and you have all this, as you know, all these different levels of things that you give to your fans and stuff. And that's a whole new model that actually my friend Brian Camilio, who invented, really, he started Artist Share, and he kind of invented crowd sharing. He just moved out here from New York too. He lives in Santa Monica, but that model that works for a lot of people. I haven't gone that route, but I'm not saying I wouldn't, but that works. So there's a lot of opportunity. There really is. You just, as I tell students, you have to be really good at what you do, and then you have to put it out there, and cultivate that audience. I guess the social media thing is important to have, but I do it. I'm not like super hardcore on it, but I guess if you can be, that probably helps. I don't want to be on social media that much. I definitely am on there, but anyway, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of ways to do things. You have to be creative in coming up with new ways to make money, basically.
Absolutely. And obviously there's concerns, like you mentioned, the whole streaming thing and Spotify and all these platforms, they don't pay that much. But, if you look at the overall picture of how the landscape has changed since the advent of the internet, the amount of opportunity that there is and the amount of leverage that you can have with very little capital in order to build your own audience is unparalleled. It's like the fact that you can just post a video of you and some friends playing one of your tunes and put it on YouTube for free, basically, and that has the potential to be seen by millions of people. That is to have imagined that level of opportunity, 20, 30 years ago would have been unthinkable.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, and that might seem counterintuitive at first, is to put something out there for free and just, as like Lewis Cole did, keep doing it. And then, but it comes, there are ways that monetizes itself that you can't even foresee, that I think that's it. I just think that where the money comes from has shifted a little bit. I don't, like I said, from albums, people are complaining about streaming and selling CDs and stuff. Who in my world actually made money from CDs? Really, people are complaining about it, but I never made any money. I've lost money on CDs. I made a little bit on a couple. I don't know anyone else who made money and made their living actually making a CD any more than nowadays. And a lot more people can hear your music now. And then there's that streaming and all that stuff can open up a lot of other opportunities. I mean, look at somebody like, I don't know, too many zoos or something. Not a band that I would really, it's not my favorite kind of thing. But there's guys playing in the subway who videoed it and kept putting it up, and then now they tour all the time. They've got massive tours and stuff. So if you're doing something that is interesting to people and you put it out there, the possibilities is that you can really turn that into something now. And yeah, you're not going to get it from the streaming thing. I mean, but who cares? We never did, really. I know that a lot of people will, be mad that I say that maybe, but if you're really realistic about it, the record companies were the ones making the money, if there was any money. It wasn't us. It's still not us. It's not going to be us, probably, but there are other ways that we can make money from that. So it's kind of, in a way, it's just like free advertising, which is all a CD or a record ever was, unless you were a big pop star. Then it was different. I mean, you're Billy Joel or something, and you sold them, how many records of whatever, just the way you are, whatever. He made millions off it. But even those big pop stars now are not making money off those records because the medium has changed in that way. And so I think I was reading about what's her name, the British singer that I really like. Anyway, I can't remember, but she was saying that most of the women in the pop world make more money from going to parties, getting invited, like fashion things, or given fashion. There's all this behind the scenes stuff that people are making money at, like somebody like Beyonce or something. I don't think they're making tons of money from their albums, believe it or not. But there's so many other things that come up now because of that, and advertising and, promoting something, So I think there's, you just have to be creative with what you can do with your own creativity. The thing for me is just to be honest with the creativity in the first place, and I'm just putting stuff out there that I love. I'm not trying to aim it at anything. If I do something, it's because I love doing it, and I do it as well as I can. And that's the way I look at art in general, and what I like and don't like. I judge by that. So I think that's the key. I mean, just keep, for me, is just be honest with your stuff. A lot of people aren't. That's why I feel like a lot of people that are popular now, I think it is about, that's the bad side of it, the byproduct of it. There's a lot of people that are popular and getting a lot of attention that really aren't doing anything. And I mean, it's kind of sad. There's a lot of stuff in the jazz world, the new jazz world, that I would just be like, hey, this is embarrassing, but it's popular, but it's not good. And I think a lot of people, well, I mean, when I talk to friends, I mean, people talk about it privately. Everyone, because of social media, people are afraid to talk about it, or name names, but it's known, what's happening, it's noticed, but that's going to happen. That's always happened, I guess, too, bad art getting popular. But anyway, there's a lot of opportunity, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. And, speaking of, creativity and the creative process, you mentioned have a bunch of instruments around you, and you're someone who's, I think, put out more than 20 albums as a leader at this point, which is kind of a lot if you think about it. And so I wanted to ask you about your compositional process. Do you make a point of writing something every day? Does it always start in the same kind of way? Do you always start with the melody? Like, how do you think about composing?
I don't write every day. I write when I have free time, which is a lot of the time, but or when I have something to write for, either a gig or a record or something. There's no one way I do things. I just, I write at the keyboard here and into the computer, and I just start. It could be a melody, it could be bass line, it could be anything, The biggest thing for me usually nowadays is what I'm going to write, like for lack of in a genre, like for lack of better term, because I have to. Am I writing something that's going to be electronic based? Then I'll actually literally put up Pro Tools and things with synthesizers, which I'm surrounded by here, and I do a lot of stuff that people haven't heard yet so much. There's hints of it on my last record, but there are some things I'm going to release very soon that are just vocal tracks that are 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. So if I'm going in that direction, I'll think of that, and a lot of times that's inspired basically by the sounds that I pick. I'll just start going through sounds, and when I go through sounds, they'll start to lead me to something. And I think that's a way a lot of current pop music and electronic music is written. So I'll do that. But then I'm also, like I said, I write stuff that's for my band, which is more, for lack of a better term, like a jazz thing. It's modern writing, usually kind of through composed now with solo sections. I don't tend to write, here's the head and here's the solos and now the head. I don't really do that much anymore. Everything I've written is kind of a through composed piece with different sections of improvisation. And I've been doing that for quite a while, but now it's primarily that. And that'll be for the certain band, certain instrumentation. Then I'm also doing this stuff, like I said, for like classical instruments that doesn't really involve improvisation much. And that I'll put up Sibelius, which is just a different way of doing it. And usually with just a piano sound, I'll start writing and orchestrate with some string sounds. So I kind of think that way. What mood am I in, and what do I feel like doing? And it's a wide variety. So soon the records that are going to come out are going to be really varied, really varied, like way more than anything I've done in the past. So I'm excited about that. But that's kind of what I do. And as far as, I don't really have any rules for writing. I just start, and whatever sounds good, I keep, and whatever doesn't, I get rid of. What happens, the big thing, more than, it's a long story, but more than the technical things that people talk about with writing, also sometimes with playing, I don't concern myself with those things. I think it's much more conceptual things that I concern myself with, and basically taste or aesthetic, or like when to do things, when not to, what to keep, what to take out. Have I heard this before? Have I done this before? What kind of mood does this need to be in? Does this go on too long? Does this need to be longer? There's all the, I could go on and on with those kind of, that's what I concern myself with composition. Those are the only things I concern myself with. If you say what key is it and what the chord is called, what form is it, I never thought about any of that stuff ever. I don't care. I just write what I hear, because when I start, I could imagine I'm going to write something long, and it could end up being 2 bars. Sometimes I think I'm going to write something with two bars, and it ends up being 20 minutes of through composed stuff. So you never know. I just let it happen. And then it's all about playing with the energy of what's going on, and when things should be, end and start, and all that kind of stuff. It's conceptual stuff. And that gets a lot more involved. Like when I talk to people about composition, I have people bring their compositions in, and we go through them in that way. And I produce a lot, and I think that's why I produce a lot, because when I started doing that with a lot of people, like Donnie McCaslin, and I produced not his last record, but the 8 records before that, I think, and a bunch of people. It was because when I'd be in the session, I'd be like, what if we do this? What if we do? Oh, we shouldn't do that. And people thought, oh, he knows how this should go. So that's pretty apparent to me. When I hear people's music, it's like really obvious, like, well, this works, this doesn't work, and this is why, you know. But it'll rarely be very technical, you know.
Do you think that those kind of sensibilities just come from a lifetime of listening? Is it the fact that you've composed so much? Where do you think that originates from, being able to hear someone else's composition and have a very strong, intuition of what should happen in any given moment?
Yeah, I think it's about all those things. I think it's about some other stuff too that's not even musical. I think just being aware of what's around you. I mean, I don't know if this makes any sense, but I've always been the kind of person that if I was in a restaurant or something, I not only knew what we were talking about, but I kind of knew what was going on around me, who was sitting where, what they were talking about, what's going on. It's just sort of I was never kind of just like this. So it's kind of this openness to stuff that I think has benefited my musical thing. And then also I've just been a voracious like listener. I mean, I listen to everything, and I always have, and so I kind of know what's going on in every sort of music, even now, it's, yeah, I listen to modern country, I've listened to electronic, I listen to classical. I mean, foreign music's, I'll just spend like on a Friday, like tomorrow, for when the records come out, like on iTunes or something. I'll usually spend a couple hours like late at night before I go to bed and just go through everything. I'll look through all these new releases and check out most all of it in various categories, like maybe 6 or 7 of the categories. I won't go through like children's and certain things like that, but all of it, and so kind of, I find a lot of stuff that way, and then there's a lot of stuff that's inspirational and a lot of bad stuff too. But I've always been like that. I'm always getting records, old records now, still, everything.
Does it often happen that you have a concept in mind for an album, or does it kind of work the other way? Like you're just composing, whatever you hear, as you were saying, and then it kind of formulates into something that you think, hey, maybe I should make this into a record. How does that process work?
I've done it that way, but most of the time I have a plan. I'm like, okay, it's usually a group of people. I think of, I want a certain sound, I'm going to use these people, and then I start thinking about writing for that. There have been records where I had material that was around that I brought into the current bands that I had, or there's one record in particular called Anna Kappa that is mostly older material that I had around that I always liked, and I just finally wanted to record, and was actually written for like an acoustic group when I was doing those groups with like Brian Blade and Scott Colley and Chris Potter, Taborn and those guys. I had a certain sound with those bands, and a lot of that music was written for that. And then I realized I didn't really want to do it in that way, so I adapted it and used it with like Weiss. And I had 2 drummers, Weiss and Obed, and Wayne Krantz and Adam Rogers and Matt Brewer, John Screet. So I kind of, made it, just adapted it for a more electric kind of sound. And it worked. I actually really like it. But that record that music was written. Also, even my last record, there's a bunch of the Here and Now. It's like an electronic thing mostly. There are some tracks that I actually did about 8 or 9 years ago, and I just kind of remixed and mastered and put them out because I always loved them, and so I wanted a record to put those things out, and I wrote some new stuff for that, but half of it is older stuff.
Yeah, so you were talking a little bit about the beginning, playing with a lot of younger folks, people who are as young as 21 or in their 20s. And there's a lot of talk, in the culture about, the millennials or Generation Z or whatever they're being called now, and being entitled like all these things. Would you say, based on what you've seen and your experiences working with a lot of these younger musicians, would you say in general you're optimistic about their ability to make their way in music and remain, authentic and all that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean, especially here again, I find a lot of the musicians here, it's there are certain percentage of musicians. It's like that, especially being like a teacher, you can sort of see pretty quickly which people have a chance to do something and which people don't, to be honest. But I keep coming across musicians here that really have a chance to be, and I know they'll be around for years doing interesting stuff. And the thing that I found about here a little bit more than New York is that they're just so enthusiastic, so sort of respectful, and also just anxious and to do stuff. And they're constantly calling me like, "Hey, can we come over? Do you want to play? Can we do a listening session?" Because I started doing these listening sessions a while ago here. I haven't done one in a while, and sometimes I would do it at Blue Whale, sometimes here. But I pull out a lot of LPs, older records, a lot of stuff that I grew up with that I know that the younger generation hasn't heard, and I just play them stuff, and they're blown away, like they've never heard this stuff. So they're excited about it. So they really they'll call me. I mean, they call me to come over like all the time, and just so that kind of attitude and interest in the music in itself. Plus, they're really, really good. I mean, they're at another level than any of us were at that age in my generation. I mean, it's the thing that they need to get more than anything in the improvising thing is just how that really organic improvising thing happens, because they're so trained. But that was one of my goals with coming here is to try to bring that sort of knowledge, whatever it is, about that thing, the stuff that I picked up in New York from the older generation there, to these kids, and they've embraced it and really gotten it. And so the gigs, and that works for me, because then the gigs are amazing. Like tonight will be really, really fun, and it'll stretch, and they really have opened up, and so they have all this technical ability, but now they're really getting the improvisational thing. So I do gigs now here also. I do all these things with a lot of composition, but I also do stuff with it's just completely free, which I used to do a lot in New York with a lot of the people I came up with there. But a lot of the young musicians, that was hard for them. Like, well, what do we do? They always want something. What do we do? Some kind of instruction. And it's like, I don't know. You got to make it up. That's the whole point. So they're getting that here, and that's become. And what's interesting here too that I've noticed is the audiences really eat it up. So I can go into a place now and just have a gig and announce we're going to just improvise, and people are into it and they get super excited about it and they like the gigs, and that's sort of new for here. Not as new for New York, although it doesn't happen as much in New York, it seems like, as it used to. So it's happening here a lot, and I think that's great. So there's so many good young players, and they're all, I think their heads are in the right space. I think the future's really bright, actually, like brighter than I've ever seen it, I would say.
Yeah, man, that's beautiful, and I'm highly optimistic as well. And so today's Halloween, end of October, going into November 2020 is on the horizon here. What are you most looking forward to getting to do in 2020?
Well, the biggest thing for me is just releasing new music. I mean, my whole thing, that interest is to put out art. I mean, I consider myself an artist in that way, and that's what my job is, so to speak. So, I just have to be productive in that way. Sometimes it can be hard if, the last few years I've been on the road a lot, not so much this year, but I was on the road a lot. So my output was kind of put aside. I did better financially. I was on the road a lot, whatever, but I was doing less recording and putting things out. And now this year I have had a little bit more time. And so I've had time to get these things organized and put them together. So like I said before, there'll be a lot of new stuff released in 2020. And I'm super excited about that because that's really what I love doing. I love playing live gigs and everything, but to make something and work really hard at it and put it out there and know it's going to be there forever is that's the most important thing for me. So that's the thing I'm most excited about in 2020.
Right on, man. Hey, David, this was awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you today. I can't thank you enough for sharing your time because I know you're a busy person. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really great that you're doing this, and good questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I hope people will find this valuable. I'm very confident that they will. I think we covered a lot of ground in the last 45 minutes or so. So thank you again, David. And I look forward to seeing what you put out next. And stay on the line for 1 second.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for checking out the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to this so you don't miss an episode. For more episodes, please visit BerniesBootlegs.com.